Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. This is John. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book, coming to you this afternoon to chat with Martin Walker. We were supposed to have him in store this evening, but because of COVID, his tour was canceled, which we completely understand. I was just telling him before we went live, we had COVID run through the staff a while back, and definitely not something to play with. So while we're sad that we don't actually get to see him in store, we're really excited that we still get to chat with him virtually. So before I bring him out and get started, just let everybody know what is going on with us. We've been hosting in-store events again since January. We're still doing some virtual stuff too. So if you look at the Murder by the Book website, which is murderbooks.com, you'll see events are either going to be listed as in-store or virtual. Our plea is if somebody is coming through in-store that you're super excited about, please pre-order books. Please come see them. We want publishers to know that people love both being able to do this virtually so we can get to everybody, and also being in the store with authors too. So lots of great stuff coming up. As always, if you can't make it to an event, we're happy to get something signed for you. We can hang on to the store, we can ship it, any of that. Tomorrow, we are going to have Beverly Lowry in store for her nonfiction book, Deer Creek Drive. And then we've got a full week next week. We're going to have Lisa Jewell in conversation with Kristen Bird on Monday, Ashley Winstead in conversation with Allison Wisdom on Tuesday. Sandra Brown is going to be in the store with us on Wednesday. And then we're super excited to have Mark Pryor, who is going to be in conversation with Celeste Connolly, who some of you might know as S.C. Perkins, on Saturday. So lots of great stuff coming up. As I said, check out murderbooks.com for any info about upcoming events. While we're chatting this afternoon, if you have any questions for Martin about this newest book, previous books, Bruno, writing process, any of that stuff, please post those in the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook. I'm going to bring Martin Walker out and get him introduced. How are you tonight, Martin?
Hi there. Too soon to tell, but I know I'm hanging in there. Despite the unusual heat wave we've got here in France, we're not used to temperatures over 100 degrees here, but that's what we've got right now.
I cannot imagine dealing with temperatures like that. And here we're even used to it. But you know, there was a short period of time where they were talking about us potentially having rolling blackouts, and just the idea of doing it without power terrified me. I cannot imagine how you guys are doing it without air conditioning.
Well, nobody's ever had air conditioning here in France. At the best, we have fans, perhaps, but that's about it. The gardens are really suffering. The vineyards are suffering. We're all a bit worried about this. And I mean, you've probably seen that the river levels in Europe are extremely low. They've stopped a lot of the traffic on the Rhine, which is a major artery for barges. And it's very strange. It's most unusual for us.
Yeah. So when you see, I'll get you introduced, but that leads me to a question then. So when you see stuff like this happening, like you said, it's affecting the vineyards and stuff like that, is this all stuff that's kind of percolating in the back of your head for a potential future book?
Well, indeed, because a couple of books, the book that came out last year, The Coldest Case, featured a forest fire. And we've had several of those here this year. And so, yes, this change in climate, I write about it a bit as it pertains to wine, because some of the classic grapes that we use here in the Bergerac and in the Bordeaux, like Merlot, are ripening 2-3 weeks earlier than they should. And that's a problem because although the grapes are ripe, the phenols, the tannins have not ripened. So they don't have the real taste and depth that we're used to. So it's really a challenge for a lot of people. Farmers, I mean, the crops, we reckon the crop yield is going to be down 15-20% this year because of the shortage of water and the heat. And my garden has certainly suffered.
So we are here today to talk about To Kill a Troubadour. As any of you guys who are local to us know, we are all huge Martin Walker fans. We've been fans of the Bruno series. We kind of joke there are a couple of series that we don't understand how there's anybody in Houston who has not read them yet. And it's the Bruno series and Louise Penny's Three Pines books, because we've sold so many of them. It's hard to believe that there's anybody that we've missed, but we still have customers come in and we hand them to them. So we've been huge fans since the series started. To Kill a Troubadour is book number 15 in the series. And officially, Martin Walker, after a long career of working in international journalism and for think tanks, now gardens, cooks, explores vineyards, writes, travels, and has never been busier. He divides his time between Washington, D.C. and the Dordogne. So to get us into it today, can you tell everybody maybe a little bit about who Bruno is and what he's up to in this newest release?
Okay, well, Bruno is the local village policeman of a place called Saint-Denis in the Périgord region of France, in the southwest of France. And the Périgord is well known for, I think, three things. First of all, the extraordinary quality of the food. It's the culinary heartland of France with the foie gras and the truffles. Secondly, it's known for the extraordinary amount of prehistory. Most of what we know about Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon people came from this valley of the River Vézère, where I now live, with the famous Lascaux cave and over 150 caves decorated in various ways by our prehistoric forefathers. And I think the third reason why it's become such an emblematic region of France is that the medieval history as well is just as compelling as the prehistoric times, because we have something like 1,500 chateaux and fortresses in this region of the Périgord. It was a frontier between the English and the French for the 300 years between the 1100s and the 1400s, when the English were running the place. And this combination of history, food, and wine is for me quite compelling. So I'm in a way, I'm still being a journalist. I'm writing what I see, I'm writing what I know, I'm writing what I eat, writing what I drink. And it's I somehow managed to shoehorn a bit of mystery and so on into all of this. But it's really, I mean, my books are, I don't know whether my hero is Bruno, the chief of police, or whether it's the Périgord itself, because it really captures my imagination.
Yeah. And so what is Bruno up to in To Kill a Troubadour?
Well, it begins when his friend Jean-Jacques, who is the head of detectives for the département, arrives late at night at Bruno's place and says, "We've just had a mysterious car crash, a car that was stolen on the Spanish frontier. And looking at it, we find this bizarre cartridge, which we've never seen before. And you're the military man here, Bruno. You spent 10 years in the French army. What can you tell us about it?" And Bruno looks at it and says, "Well, it's a 12.7 millimeter, which is 0.5 inches in American terms." And he says normally it's used in machine guns for anti-aircraft fire, but increasingly it's used for very specialist sniper weapons. And as you perhaps know, Bruno goes on, in the last few years, we've seen the range of lethality for snipers growing from about 1 kilometer, about 1,000 meters, up now to the record is over 3,000 meters. And this really is something that Bruno takes seriously, because this kind of cartridge is very seldom seen in France. And so from then on, the next morning, Bruno hears on the radio that a song has just been banned by the Spanish government. And it's a song that's been recorded by some friends of his, a group called Les Troubadours, who love the old medieval music and have modernized it a bit and are singing some of the songs that came from the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries. And why on earth should this song be banned? Well, it's a song for Catalonia, and the actual recording is in French and in Catalan and in Occitan, which is the old language of this region. And so Bruno thinks, well, this is weird. Why would the Spanish government want to ban it? Well, of course, Catalonia has been trying to get its independence. There was a general strike. There was some violence. A lot of the leaders of the Catalan movement were either arrested or went into exile. It's still a bit of a burning issue. And for the people of southwestern France, who have a huge cultural relationship with this part of Spain, the language is pretty much the same, Catalan and Occitan. And I have neighbors whose telephone answering machines are in Occitan, the old traditional language of this area. It's Bruno realizes this is tricky because he has got one of his free concerts that he organizes in Saint-Denis during the summer. He has got Les Troubadours coming to perform on the riverbank of Saint-Denis, and he thinks, well, Spanish government banning the song. Somebody now has a car stolen on the Spanish border. and it's got a sniper's bullet in there. Whoa, this could be tricky. So off we go. And then partly because I was based in Moscow for many years in the 1980s. I was the Guardian's bureau chief throughout the time that Gorbachev was there in Moscow. I've kept a very lively eye upon what's been happening in Russia under Vladimir Putin. And some of you may recall that in the last book, the Coldest Case, I had, and the one before that, the shooting at Chateau Rock, I had some elements of this tension between Russia and the Ukraine, because anybody who knows Russia realized that after 2014, when Russia first invaded and took parts of Ukraine, this wasn't over for Putin. And many of us were not at all surprised that he then invaded and has gone for broke. So I began trying to bring these various strands together, while also bringing in quite a lot of what we know, what we have learned about what Russian intelligence has been up to in terms of cyber warfare, interfering in US elections in 2016, in the Brexit referendum in Britain in the same year, interfering in various other elections in Europe. The Russians have been behaving in an extraordinarily aggressive manner, not just towards Ukraine, but to others, including the murder of people, the attempted murder of people in Britain. There was a Soviet, ex-Russian intelligence dissident whom they tried to kill with a nerve agent in this placid cathedral town of Salisbury in Britain. And they happened to kill a British citizen in the course of doing this. So I wanted to try and bring some of all this together, because Bruno lives in this context of, he might be enjoying the placid rural life and the good food of the Perigord, but whether it's Islamic terrorism, whether it's Russian aggression, whether it's Basque independence movements, whether it's the IRA, Bruno finds that the world keeps creeping in to his calm little quarter of civilized historic France.
So one of the things that I think that you do really well is you bring in a lot of these kind of contemporary world issues into the books in a way that I don't know that we necessarily see, or that people would necessarily think that they're going to get when they pick up what seemingly is a traditional village mystery. So how do you balance some of those bigger world issues with kind of that traditional village mystery?
Well, because none of us is untouched by greater events that are taking place in the world. I mean, we've seen here in my part of France, we've seen the gasoline prices double because of the Ukraine war and the various embargoes that Putin has been placing. We've seen the costs for gas and so on rising dramatically. And as a result, people are starting to realize just how interconnected the world is. And it's one thing to say, oh, we're a long way from Ukraine, we're a long way from Russia, but suddenly they're right there in your pocketbook. And the same thing is happening in the USA, the same thing's happening in Britain, in Germany, around the world. And so, I mean, what I wanted to say is that I think we're in an era where the old traditional Agatha Christie kind of village murder mystery is no longer operating in that little enclosed, protected world of the village. All of a sudden, we are all involved in these global issues. And and because I'm fascinated by all of this, I want to bring it into my books. But at the same time, I want to write about the food, the village life, the market in Saint-Denis, the dog that Bruno has, and the fact that his dog Balzac, his basset hound, has now got puppies, and the puppies are making an appearance in this book as well, and the food is making an appearance, and equally, Bruno has started to learn to cook vegan food, because he had a guest in the last novel who was a young artist down from Paris who was a vegan, and he had the challenge of producing his first vegan dinner. So, I mean, these things are constantly part of us. And again, in the last novel, I had a forest fire. And this year, we have had something like a dozen forest fires here in this département. So it's, I'm trying to sort of write about what I know and what I feel and what we're going through here in the Perigord. And the fact is that the world is a very interconnected place these days.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that I think a lot of us have learned in the last like 2 or 3 years is just how one thing affects everything else. Whether it's been, shortage for groceries when you go to the grocery store, or even in the publishing world, delays because of like paper shortages and things that, you wouldn't think about. So it's interesting to see, like I said, the way that you're able to tell those stories in the guise of these village mysteries.
Well, it's a challenge to do so. I mean, this book should have been published in May. That was the plan.
Mhm.
But of course, with the paper shortages and the printing shortages in the US, it's been a problem. So, like many books, mine has been delayed, and it's odd because the book came out in the UK in May as
Mhm.
on schedule, and so I've heard from my British publishers that quite a lot of American readers have been getting hold of the British edition because it came
Mhm.
out earlier.
Yeah.
Well, c'est la vie. But I think this combination between the local and the international is something that adds a depth. It adds a dimension
Definitely.
to my books, and I'm quite happy to do it. Also because I like doing it. I
Yeah.
mean, my life was most of my life was spent in international journalism or involved in international economics, and I've always felt this connection was getting deeper and deeper,
Mhm.
and that if a sparrow falls in Texas, then we're going to get a hurricane in the Dordogne.
Yeah. So you mentioned your journalism background, and some of your earlier books you did a mix of nonfiction, and you also did some fiction as well. But what made you decide when you were going to start this series with Bruno? What made you turn to mystery to tell this story?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, my earlier books were, I wrote a book about the history of the Cold War. I wrote a book about Gorbachev and Perestroika. Um, I wrote books about American history and European history. And then when I first began coming regularly to the Perigord, I became fascinated by the prehistory and the ancient caves and these extraordinary drawings and paintings that people put into these caves, like at Lascaux or Font-de-Gaume. And I was so fascinated to try and think, what kind of society was it 18,000 years ago that could produce this kind of masterpiece? And so I wrote my first novel then. I wrote my novel called The Caves of Perigord, which was entirely about what kind of society would have produced the Lascaux masterpiece. And at the same time, I brought into the same novel, I had World War II, when the Perigord was a crucial center for the resistance in France, probably the most intensive resistance run area in the country. And I was able to bring these two together. And then I we bought ourselves a holiday home here in the Perigord, and I began getting to know local people, joining the tennis club, the rugby club, finding myself recruited into helping train the kids with rugby. And because I'd played rugby as you can probably see from my broken nose, I'd played perhaps too much rugby when I was a young man, um, and helping teach the kids tennis. And in the course of it, I met our local village policeman, a guy called Pierrot, who hated to arrest anybody. He'd done 10 years in the French army. He was a hunter, a very good cook, and a really nice guy, a very good friend. And I thought, this is a wonderful character. And I want to write a book about him at the Perigord, the modern Perigord. But if he's a policeman, I'm going to have to write a kind of a crime story. How on earth do I start doing that? So I wrote the first one. And my wife was as always, is my first reader, Julia. And she read the manuscript and she said, you've got something here, but you have to change his name. You can't call him Pierrot. You have to have an international name, like, I don't know, Bruno. So he became Bruno. Then she said, now, publishers, because she had worked in publishing for a while, she said, publishers like the idea of there being a series. So go away and write 5 paragraphs, one on each of the next 5 in the series.
Wow.
Julia is always right. I did exactly as she told me. And 2 months later, the series had been sold in the US, in Britain, in Germany, and other countries. So Julia really, I mean, Julia was the woman who was the reason I'm actually sitting here in the Perigord right now.
Oh.
We'd always been staying with friends of ours who he'd been a journalist in the Lebanon when I was there as well. We'd become buddies, and he and his wife had not retired, but decided to move to the Perigord. And Julia and I would go and stay with them. And because we got married about the same time, we had our first babies about the same time, and so Julia and I were there staying with Michel and Gabrielle, while our daughter Kate and their daughter Olivia were sort of rolling around naked. And Michel and I were building his terrace with the cement mixer, and Julia and Gabrielle were cooking up wonderful meals. And then when we were in Moscow, where the story was terrific, but the food was unspeakable. The prospect of coming to the Perigord for a couple of weeks and staying with our friends in the summer was wonderful. And then there was one summer when I had to go back to Washington. I had an interview set up with President Clinton in the White House, and Julia and our daughters were staying with our friends. And Julia had said something to me about, oh, we're a pair of foreign correspondents. We really need to get some sort of roots for the children, a fixed home that they know. And I said, oh, yes, good idea. And like most husbands, I sort of, forgot about it. Then I'm in the anteroom to the Oval Office, in the secretary's room. And this is in the 90s. My mobile phone, which in those days was like a brick, began to ring. And it was Julia saying, I don't care what you're doing. You better drop everything and get the next plane to France. I've found our house. And I said, well, White House, President Clinton interview. But, 3 days later, I was on a plane to France, and Julia had indeed found this house from which I'm now speaking to you. A lovely old place, 17th century, the first part of it, the old farmhouse, and then barns from the 18th and 19th centuries. It's a lovely place. And Julia, as always, was right.
So you said that you mapped out like 5 paragraphs for the first 5 books in this series. How close did you stick to those when you actually started writing the rest of the series?
Well, close-ish. I mean, yeah. In that there was a driving theme in them. And I wanted to write about wine, which was Dark Vineyard, and I wanted to write about truffles, which was the Black Diamond. I wanted to write about archaeology, which was the Crowded Grave, and I wanted to write a bit about the history of the Resistance. So that came into the Devil's Cave, and off I went, and stories, ideas kept coming. I mean, the lovely thing about this part of the world is that you're never short for inspiration. But what came in almost accidentally was my growing interest in food, and particularly the local cuisine. And Julia is a wonderful cook. I mean, and she's been a food writer for the Washington Post and the Sunday Times in London and others. And she really is a terrific cook. And she writes now an excellent column for Substack, Julia Watson at Substack.com. I recommend it. And so with Julia, I got more and more interested in cooking myself and in the food that we were eating. And so that became more and more part of the books, because Bruno, the original guy behind Bruno, Pierrot, is himself a great cook. And he used to teach me some things, like he taught me how to make a foie gras poêlé with a sauce of honey and mustard. Which is wonderful. And I learned more and more about cooking. And then we began working on, because we had a huge success in Germany, where the Bruno books became #1 in bestsellers, that people began demanding a Bruno cookbook, which Julia and I produced. And Julia did the recipes, I did the twiddly bits in between, that too turned into a big success, and it's now coming out next year in the USA.
Oh, yay! That's exciting.
Yeah, the Bruno cookbook is coming, and it's finally. And
yeah.
So, I mean, these things start to come in, and then I got to know. I began writing a column about wine. Well, what happened was that the impact of the Bruno series upon tourism was quite important. I mean, they reckon that German tourism tripled with the Bruno books, and Germans were number 10 in visitors to the Perigord. They're now equal second. And so the French government gave me a gold medal for services to tourism. The Alliance Française International gave me the Prix Charbonnier, which is given to somebody who has done something special for French culture. So I'm in the footsteps of Julia Child and François Truffaut, the filmmaker, and Pierre Cardin, the clothes designer. So that was a great honor. So that sort of impact upon tourism here in the Perigord, I think, had an impact certainly on my profile, as it were, here in the region. And they made me an ambassador of the Perigord. And then the local wine association, which is called the Consulat de la Vigne de Bergerac, made me a Grand Consul. And I'm the first Scotsman in 700 years to be made a Grand Consul. Now, because the Vigne de Bergerac was founded in the year 1254 by an English king, Henry III, who was, Henry was, at that time, he was also the Duke of Aquitaine, so he controlled the region. And that tradition of wine became more and more important to me. And I began writing a column for a local newspaper, a regular column on Bergerac wine. It turns out I'm the only person on the planet who writes regularly and only about the wines of Bergerac. So because I felt I should give something back. I should do something in return. It's been an eye-opener for me. I've made so many friends among the winemakers. I've learned so much about wine. I now have my own wine, the Cuvée Bruno, which is now available in the USA and elsewhere and so on. So, and I look, I mean, here I am. I'm meant to be retired. I'm 75 years old. I'm learning new stuff all the time. I mean, whoever thought I would be a winemaker? But boom, here we go. It's the Perigord has been just so wonderful for me that I just love celebrating it in my novels, and it's been a whole different kind of life in these last 15 years with Bruno, because I write a novel every year, and I've just been so lucky. I think I was lucky because I was the first non-French writer to write about the Perigord and what a magical place it is. And part of that magic I try to convey in this new novel, because among the many things I keep learning is the importance of that old Occitan-Catalonia link, southwestern France and Spain, and the way in which so much of modern literature and music came through the Perigord from Spain and from the Moors who were in Spain. So most of the medieval musical instruments, like the rebec and so on, the lute, and they came originally from Spain, from the Moors in Spain. Yeah. And it was that extraordinary woman, Eleanor, Duchess of Aquitaine. Her grandfather, William IV, Duke of Aquitaine, in the 11th century, he was the first known troubadour. Here he was, the Duke of Aquitaine. He was writing these troubadour songs, which he had learned while on crusade against the Moors in Spain. And he'd been captured for them for a while, and so he learned a bit about their language and their culture. And Eleanor, his granddaughter, grew up in the castle where he kept several Moorish prisoners until they could pay their ransom to be released. So Eleanor, as a child, was learning about the music, the musical instruments, the rhythms of the poetry, which became the whole troubadour tradition. I mean, they were the first pop songs, really, of Western Europe. And on top of that, it was not just the music and the musical instruments, it was also an awful lot of the philosophy. So we'd known about Aristotle, but we hadn't known about Plato, because a lot of the Plato stuff had been lost with the fall of Rome. That came to us through the Moors. An awful lot of what became medieval medicine came to us through the Moors. So this connection of this way in which the Perigord was kind of the transmission center for this Moorish Spanish culture to get to the rest of Europe. And the classic example is the tales of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, because it began as a fairly dry history of a Welsh king by Geoffrey of Monmouth at the court of Henry II. And it was Eleanor who brought in other poets who would include new characters, like, for example, Sir Tristan and Iseult, this great adulterous, passionate affair. And then it was Chrétien de Troyes, who is a French poet himself, it was Chrétien who added in the concept of the round table. That's not in the original British version. And new characters come in, like Sir Galahad and Sir Lancelot. These were brought in by Eleanor's friends. And of course, Wagner's great opera, Parsifal, would not have existed without Sir Percival, that was brought in by a Norman poet who was singing as a bard at the court of Eleanor and King Henry II of England in Normandy. So I was just blown away by this kind of stuff. I mean, imagine, I'd studied history at university. I thought I knew quite a lot about history, but wow, I mean, it's like your mind opens up. So I wanted to write about my own fascination with this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bring a lot of that in. But I also wanted to bring in things like Eleanor's son, Richard Lionheart, whose mother tongue was Occitan and who wrote poetry in Occitan. And one of his famous poems, I Who Here in Prison Lie, was actually recorded in a modern version in the just about 15 years ago by Brian Ferry as a piece of modern rock music.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, here we have a cultural tradition that goes back from the 12th century here in the Perigord to 19th century Germany with Wagner and to 21st century rock music. So you bet I wanted to write about this. And I'm just so grateful that I got to know a lot of these modern troubadours and people who are singing and working and writing poetry in this Occitan language. And I just keep learning stuff, and it's rejuvenating.
So how does that work from, so you have this fascination with troubadours, how does that morph into like the seed of the book? Is it something that you like think, oh, I'm really interested in this, so I'm going to include this in the next book? Or is it something that you discover and then you say, oh no, this is definitely the next book? Which comes first for you?
It's hard to tell. I wanted to write something about this Catalan independence movement and so on, because it was having so much of an impact here in this region. And then I thought, well, let's make it a song. And I knew some singers, some folk singers who were singing in Occitan, making modernized versions of the old songs. And I'd been to their concerts, and I thought, well, yeah, okay, they do a song about Catalonia. It gets banned. The right-wing extremists in Spain decide they're going to be taught a lesson. But maybe there's another element in here as well. And when I was based in Moscow, that famous spy, Kim Philby, a British spy who was number 2 in British intelligence, had been the British intelligence representative in Washington, D.C. in the late 1940s. Kim Philby died, having defected to Moscow. And I was there at the funeral, and I was there at the grave and wrote stories about him. And then I was told by somebody I knew in the Soviet foreign ministry that there was another equally important funeral taking place, and it was a woman called Maria de las Hayes, Maria Africa. She was known as Africa de las Hayes, and she was from a wealthy family in Spain who joined the Communist Party before the Spanish Civil War of 1936. And she worked for the Soviets throughout that Civil War. They got her out before the Franco took over. So they moved her back to Moscow. In World War II, she was sent to coordinate partisan activity, guerrilla activity, against the Division Azul, which was the Blue Division, a division of some 12,000 men, volunteers from Spain who wanted to fight on the German side against Soviet Bolshevism. And after that, she is moved to by the Kremlin, by the KGB. She is moved to South America. She was the woman who gave the first warning to the Soviets about the coming invasion of the Bay of Pigs. She was also very much involved in the intelligence around the Cuba Missile Crisis. She was brought back to Moscow and put in charge of training for all of the Spanish language part of the KGB. And she had a daughter also called Africa, who also went into the KGB. So I bring in this tradition, this woman who I first saw her in a coffin being buried. And I was amazed at how many Soviet officials I saw there at that funeral, and it always stuck with me. Something about being an old journalist is that you can always recycle your old stories somehow. And so I bring in Africa, and I bring in some of the stuff that we've been learning about the various cyber warfare operations of Russian intelligence. And that now comes into this. And was it the Spaniards, or was it Spaniards being manipulated by Russians, and so on? So this is the real world. And it's also, as in a previous book, I'd been writing about tensions between Russia and the Ukraine. I actually had a fight between a Russian character and a Ukrainian character. Russia's invasion was not a surprise to any of us who knew Russia. And what was a surprise was the incompetence of the military operation, from what we've seen so far. But because I'm fascinated by the Perigord and its food and its history and its culture and traditions, but I'm also still fascinated by the world we live in, whether it be Islamic terrorism, whether it be Russian aggression, whether it be Putin, whether it be Ukraine. And they all come into the mix in this confused head of mine, and they come out as stories.
So as you're working, like you said, there were some elements of this in the last book that you're building on. So are you planning a couple of books ahead as you're working on stuff?
Yeah, I'm currently I've already finished the first draft of the next novel, which again has quite a lot to do with intelligence, because it's not widely known, but quite near here, a place called Dordogne is the French version of your National Security Agency, the main electronic intelligence listening post. And so I've always wanted to bring that in, because I've known people who've worked there, and I've known a couple of Brits who actually helped teach the French écouteurs, the French listeners, various kinds of English accents, including, there's one quite humorous aspect about this, is that because so many people are speaking in English, although they're perhaps Chinese or Indian or South American or African, that one of the things that these French electronic monitors have to do is to work out what kind of English is being spoken. So what the French have done is they've been downloading sex sites, when they can find a Japanese man and an African woman trying to communicate in English, or a Mexican guy and a Vietnamese woman trying to. This is how they test just how good the English is of the guys, the écouteurs, the people monitoring the stuff. And I thought this was quite amusing, so I wanted to bring this kind of aspect into it.
Yeah.
And also I wanted to bring in something about the way in which it's not widely known, but for most of the Cold War period, the main intelligence operation was called the Five Eyes, and it was the USA, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all of the old English-speaking community. And of course, the NSA and Britain's GCHQ would have listening posts in all of these various parts of the world. Now, when President Sarkozy, brought France back into NATO in about 10 years ago, all of a sudden, France wanted to be part of this Five Eyes. And the French have got some family jewels. It's not widely known. Remember how they used to say on the British Empire, the sun never sets? Well,
Mhm.
the sun still doesn't set on the French Empire. If you go around the world, in Guyane in South America is a French colony, or a French speaking part of the French Republic. It's where
Mhm.
they have the launching base for the European Space Agency and for many of the French test missiles. Up on the in the St. Lawrence River, just beside Canada, Saint
Mhm.
Pierre and Miquelon, two islands that are French. You go across into the Pacific, Tahiti, it's French. You go further down towards Australia, Noumea, it's French. You go across into the Indian Ocean, Ile de Réunion, it's French. You go south towards the Antarctica, Kerguelen Island, it's French. You go up to the Gulf and the French, would you believe, they've got a military base and electronic listening center in the Emirates. In other words, the French electronic intelligence operation girdles the world. And that's terribly useful for their allies in Britain and America and Australia and so on. So, and this is not widely known. So I thought, well, hell, I'll bring it into the book. And I have fun doing this kind of stuff.
Awesome. So, as you're working on a book, as you're talking about different languages, so the books are published all over the world. You've got readers in the own region where you live. You've got readers here in the U.S. Is that something that you're aware of when you're writing them? Like, are you aware of how like your neighbors are going to receive the books versus how like somebody in Houston, Texas is going to receive it, or is it just you're telling the story you're telling?
No, I'm telling the story. I mean, we're now in the books are now in 19 languages. I
Wow.
mean, Bulgarian, Korean, Japanese, Turkish, and you can't sort of allow for all of that. What I do try and do is to be aware that of something that I see around me all the time. I mean, I've got one of my favorite vineyards here in the Bergerac is called
Mhm.
Chateau de Fayol. It's run by an American couple, Frank and Ricky Campbell. They make excellent wine, and they do one of the best lunch operations in at their vineyard in the region. And I go there often with friends, and they make an excellent red wine called Sang de Sanglier, which means blood of wild boar. What a title! And, and so yeah, so I bring in Americans and I bring in Germans and I bring in, but I can't bring in everybody. But I'm very much aware that France is no longer just France. I mean, France is part of every country has a feeling about France, just as every country has a feeling about the USA. I mean, it's in this interconnected world that we live in. I think people around the world understand the kind of village community that I try and write about in my Bruno novels of Saint Denis, this village in the Périgord, a very small town of about 2,000 people. 2,000 people, and would you believe, with 5 bakeries? That's
Wow.
France. So, trying to explain this kind of thing,
Yeah.
people around the world just love it, I think. I mean, they just enjoy partaking of this dip into French life, French cuisine, French wines, French culture, with an international flavor to it. And I fell into this stuff by sheer luck, I think, but I'm so glad I did.
Yeah. So earlier this year, we got the release of Bruno's Challenge, which is a collection of short stories that had before only been some of them had been available as ebooks. And I know a lot
Yeah.
of people were excited to have those in print again. Did you go back and reread and tweak any of those stories before the print version came out?
Well, more than half of the stories I wrote they were brand new. I mean, I wrote them for
Yeah.
the collection.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, a couple of the stories had been ebooks in the UK and in the US.
Mhm.
3 of the stories had been published in German in various short story collections, but
Yeah.
most of the ones I wrote specially for it, including the title story, Bruno's Challenge.
Mhm.
And I wrote stories about things I know. So these days, I'm often called in to be to be a member of the juries or for wine prizes and so on. So I wrote one called 50 Million Bubbles, which is the number of bubbles you're meant to get in a glass of champagne, and about a wine tasting session that goes on and the kind of shenanigans that some people get up to. And another one, the Bruno's Challenge story, is Bruno has this friend, Ivan, who runs a small restaurant, a bistro in Saint Denis. And Ivan was traditionally just doing Perigord food. But then he would go away on vacation and he would meet a girl from Spain or Austria or somewhere, and he'd bring her back. And all of a sudden, the menu at Ivan's restaurant was no longer classic Perigord. There would suddenly be, from the Spanish girl, paella and dolce de leche. And then he comes back with a girl from Austria and it's Wiener Schnitzel. And he comes back with he goes off to Southeast Asia and everybody's rubbing their hands thinking, oh, Malaysian, Vietnamese food. He comes back with an Australian girl, but she is a great cook of this Malaysian, Singaporean style food. So anyway, Ivan is suddenly taken ill on a day when he's got a special dinner being arranged for a wedding anniversary for about 30 people. And as he's collapsing, he says, Bruno, you have to take over the cooking tonight. So Bruno normally cooks for his friends, like 6 or 8 people. He's never cooked for 30 people in his life.
No.
So that is his challenge, to try and do that. And then there's another one where, his dog Balzac is trying to find a lost boy. And there's another one that is about the prehistoric cave. So all of the things that I get fascinated by, if I want to write a short story, I'm not lost for an idea.
So how do you decide what's going to work as just a short story and what's going to work as potentially a full-length Bruno novel?
Well, one of the short stories was actually began as a paragraph in a novel, or began as a chapter in a novel that I thought didn't really fit there. And I suddenly realized I was looking at a short story. Wow. So I tinkered with it a bit and did it as a short story. And, the kind of thing that might be, might be a paragraph in a novel about, say, the tradition of illicit alcohol making with these stills that would produce eau de vie that is not entirely legal. I thought, well, okay, that would be a paragraph or something in a novel, but I can turn it into a short story and tell what I know about this tradition of making not quite legal eau de vie, which adds to the joyity of people in this part of the world. I can tell you, some of it's terrific. So it's when I'm gestating a novel, it's great fun to be able to write a short story, sort of to keep the muscles limber and so on. And it opens your perspective. I mean, somebody once said that they didn't have time to write a short story, so they wrote a novel instead. That short story is much harder and longer to do. Well, yeah, they are, but also they're fun to do. And I enjoy writing. I enjoy telling stories. I mean, that's part of the whole journalistic background. You like yarning away and telling stories and sharing things you know.
So Erica wants to know, she says she's super excited to start reading the new book, but she hasn't read the series before. Do you think it's good? Do you think she's okay if she jumps in here with To Kill a Troubadour?
Sorry, I had to blow my nose. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about the Bruno novels is that every novel is sort of self-standing. What does sort of develop over the series of the novels is Bruno's romantic life and the women that he gets to know and loves and loses and so on. But they all actually are all independent novels. But if they tempt you to go back and start reading some of the other ones, I'll be delighted.
So we mentioned that this new one, To Kill a Troubadour, is book 15 in the series, which I can't believe. I think the third one maybe came out right when I started at Murder by the Book, so I can't believe we're like 15 books into the series now. How has Bruno, the character, surprised you over the years?
Well, there was one novel, the novel called A Devil's Cave, when which the Germans had a much better title for it. They called it Femme Fatale. because there is this very attractive, but rather mysterious, rather dangerous woman who moves like a ballet dancer. And Bruno meets her by chance, or he thinks by chance, while out riding his horse Hector one day. And it becomes pretty clear that this woman has got her eyes set on Bruno. And she seems to be involved in some rather murky business at a chateau where a wealthy old aristocratic lady has been confined to bed. And so it's clear this woman has her eyes on Bruno, has designs on Bruno. And when I was planning the novel, I thought, well, Bruno, he's just a guy. An attractive woman hurls himself at him. How can he resist? But as I came to write this chapter, it was like a force field began coming out of my desk, almost with the force of a voice saying, for this woman, I will not drop my trousers. And I suddenly realized that Bruno would have to say no, would have to reject this woman because he didn't trust her an inch. And at that point, I thought, I'm going to have to rewrite the whole ending. I mean, it's all, if he's saying no to her, it's all going to be different. But at the same time, I thought, crikey, he's got a life of his own now. And I'm not sure how he's going to react to situations I put him into. And that was it was a real wow moment for me as a writer, that I was no longer entirely in control of this character, that somehow he had developed a personality that was dynamic enough, self-centered enough, strong enough that he could tell me what was happening. And that's been a wonderful surprise. And it's something I've shared with one or two other novelists who found the same thing happen to them, that all of a sudden their plans for their character just didn't seem to work, and that they just had to go in a different direction. It's humbling, but it's so exciting, and it's so rewarding to think that you've got a character who is like this.
So speaking of other writers, if you were picking up something to read for pleasure, who are you picking up? Who are some of your favorite writers to read?
Well, I've got to say some of my favorite writers, I'm afraid, are dead. So Sherlock Holmes, for me, remains a master. Conan Doyle's, and not just the Sherlock Holmes stories, but I also really do enjoy his history novels. Sir Nigel, The White Company, which are novels set in the 100 Years' War between France and England. Then again, Raymond Chandler, who I think is a real master. There was, in an essay that he wrote about writing, he said that one of the keys, I think, to his art was that he said that the world can be a rough place. There are mean streets, and through these mean streets, a man must go who is not afraid and who is not himself mean. And that has always been, I think, the key to Raymond Chandler's work. And that said something to me about the kind of person I wanted Bruno to become. Agatha Christie, I can read forever. But and then one of my favorite modern writers, John le Carré, is sadly no longer with us. And nor is Yulian Semyonov, who was in effect the Russian John le Carré in the Cold War days, who wrote 7 Days in May, which is an extraordinarily good spy novel about a Russian spy operating in Nazi Germany. So, but among living writers, well, there are so many that I read with pleasure. John Fullerton, a Scots writer, Val McDermid, another Scotswoman, Ian Rankin. I mean, Scots are everywhere. Ellen Griffiths, an English woman who in fact is called Dominica del Rosa. She's a good friend, and I think she's wonderful. And among Americans, well, I love Harry Bosch stories. I really do. I think some John Grisham's I still read for pleasure. And there are just so many damn good writers around these days. It's a golden age for kind of crime fiction. And one guy I'd like to mention in particular, less for his crime novels than for his history of crime novels, is Martin Edwards, who was at my college at university. I mean,
Oh,
so
wow.
we go back a long way. But he has become an extraordinary historian and analyst of this craft of the crime novel, and of course. Gaudy Knight, that one, Dorothy Sayers. I love her stuff, and there is so much damn good stuff in this genre, and it's wonderful to see it being accepted as increasingly serious writing. So yes, I enjoy reading all this stuff as well as writing it.
Yeah, it's always great to hear an author talk and mention the stuff that they love to read, and mention such a wide just a wide range of the genre as well, from spy thrillers to stuff like Agatha Christie and Ellie Griffiths. We're working on a virtual event with Ellie for her standalone coming out. So if you guys are watching and you're fans, stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have some information about that soon. But I think that is going to about do it for us this afternoon. So to recap, for anyone who might have joined us late, we've been chatting with Martin Walker, whose newest Bruno book, To Kill a Troubadour, just came out Tuesday. We've got copies if you are new to the series and you start with the beginning. We've got all of them in stock. As I mentioned, we're all huge fans. Martin, it was so wonderful to get to see you even virtually. We're going to keep our fingers crossed that when the next Bruno comes out, we'll be able to get you back in Houston and see you in the store.
I really hope so. I really want to be back there.
Yeah. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.